What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today I wanted to share my initial impressions of the Modern Warfare beta, and as you guys can already see, I am not enjoying myself with this game in its current state for now. I feel like I have to add those things at the end because I am optimistic about this game. I do feel like it has some potential, and also this is a beta build of the game which is bound to have issues. And currently, at the time of recording this video, the level cap is only at 10, and we only have access to a very small handful of content, be that perks, weapons, or attachments. So keep that in mind as we go through this video. I do have a lot of issues with the game, and I'm having a hard time finding enjoyment in the game, even when I'm doing well. Having said that, I'm going to keep pushing through it, I'm going to put the time in, and I want to enjoy this game. It's in my best interest to enjoy this game. I don't want to come off as just a hater of this, but at the same time, I have to be honest with you guys, so I'm going to be sharing my honest opinions here. But before we get into the downsides and the stuff that I'm not enjoying about it, let's talk about the things I do like about the game so far. First off, gunplay. This is something that I mentioned in the 2v2 alpha as well. I really like the way that the weapons feel. I like the way that gunfights actually feel when there is an actual gunfight, like a face-to-face sort of gunfight, when the connection is okay, which we're obviously going to be talking about in the bad section a little bit. But overall, the guns feel great. Each gun feels unique and has its own pros and cons to it. And also the overall time to kill, statistically speaking, I really like the time to kill in Infinite Warfare. I feel like they found an excellent sweet spot when it comes to that. Although there are issues with this in an online environment, which again, we're going to be covering in the bad side a little bit. It's actually one of my bigger issues currently. But statistically speaking and on paper and in a LAN environment, the time to kill is perfect in my opinion for a Call of Duty game. Another thing I really noticed with the beta is the audio seems to have improved a lot from the 2v2 alpha. I'm having a much easier time now being able to properly locate enemy footsteps based on direction, especially if the enemy is sprinting, and that's great. If an enemy is sprinting up on me, I should get some sort of an early indication that they're on their way to me, so I'm really glad they did make that adjustment. Also, something I mentioned in yesterday's video, the number of settings that we have in the beta is awesome. I'm really happy to see we have aim down sight sensitivity, we have response curves, and a wide variety of other options, even as detailed as having the classic Infinity Ward hitmarker sounds if we want to switch to that. I'm really liking the number of settings they have there, and I do feel like compared to the alpha, I have so much more control over my aim because of those aim down sight sensitivity options, and therefore that's another big upside and something I really like about this beta. Another thing that I'm really liking that they did with this that I didn't really have time to properly explore pre-launch when I got opportunities to play at the Capture event in LA, as well as way back in May when I was at the Infinity Ward studio. This is the fact that they added several different options for climbing on top of things and getting to certain positions that you may not normally expect. This does provide some great options for flanking or just straight up outplaying enemies, like they don't realize you can get to a certain spot and therefore you can use that to your advantage, at least in these early stages of the game. Additionally, I really like the loading times in this. I love the fact that everything loads really quickly, the menus aren't laggy and everything. When I hit a button, it actually responds to that button basically immediately, which I can't say the same about the past two Call of Duty games. COD World War II and Black Ops 4 were horrible in this area, at least in my experience. And with that, those are the main things that I've been enjoying about the beta so far. Now let's get into the stuff that I'm not having a great time with. And first up, the elephant in the room, and by far the biggest complaint in the community right now, if you go anywhere where people are providing feedback, this is the minimap. I don't want to dive into this in great detail because I've done that in the past. I did a whole 20-minute video as to why I feel the minimap is a core part of Call of Duty and should remain in core game modes. But in my opinion, straight up, the minimap should return. I am open to the compromise of not showing enemy dots until you get a personal radar or UAV up, for any of those people that think that I want the minimap for chasing red dots, because that's not the case at all. I want the minimap so I can see the positioning of my teammates at a glance without having to spin in circles when I hear something outside of my very limited field of view. As it is in this game, if you hear a footstep or a gunshot or anything behind you, you either have to turn around to see was that a teammate or was that an enemy, or you can just risk it and assume that it was a teammate, which sometimes works and many times doesn't work. Combine that with the fact that these maps are much more complex and porous and vertical, and I feel this is a huge problem for core game modes, And it seems like the majority of the community agrees here. Like I said, this is the biggest complaint that I've seen so far. And it seems like, based on what we can see online, the majority agrees with me here. If we look at a poll that Prestige's Key actually did on Twitter, keeping in mind that Prestige is actually somebody that's okay with keeping the minimap off, so therefore he shouldn't have a really biased audience that's just following everything he says, that poll has 7,470 votes, and 79% of people want the minimap to be turned on, 21% of the people want the minimap to be kept off. This is quite interesting because this is almost the exact proportion of players that we would traditionally see in core versus hardcore. If you go back to Call of Duty games where we had player counts, or at least player percentages, it was almost always roughly 80% of the players playing core and 20% of the players playing hardcore. It varied a little bit, but it was roughly around that point. So the answer to this seems pretty obvious to me. Add the minimap back for core game modes. People that don't want the minimap can go play hardcore, or they have another option this year. They have the realism mode, which has standard health aside from headshots. Headshots will be a one-shot kill, and no heads-up display. I think that's absolutely the easiest and most obvious solution that would make the most amount of people happy. Now, thankfully, Infinity Ward has already acknowledged this, and they did mention that they are working on a change of some description. We don't know exactly what this is going to be, but they are working on a change behind the scenes. And honestly, I'm really hoping we get to see this change by the end of the second weekend of the beta. Now, yes, I do want Xbox and PC players to give it a shot without the minimap as the developers initially intended it, but I'm hoping by the end of the beta at least, they will have given this change a go, because I think it will make a big difference for a lot of people. Now, moving on to the next thing that I'm not enjoying about the beta so far, this is the connection issues. It's more so an issue of the feeling of your time to kill versus your time to die. Now, like I said, statistically speaking, I like the time to kill in this game, but there's something going on, at least today, with the connections that I've been noticing. I didn't experience this as much last night when I was playing, but now that I'm playing it today, I have been running into this almost every single game. It feels like enemies are killing me in one bullet. Yet for me, it's taking me 4 to 5 bullets to get a kill, because that's how many bullets it actually takes to get a kill. This has been an incredibly frustrating experience because I just feel like I'm always at a massive disadvantage while playing, and that makes it very hard to enjoy myself when it feels like everybody else has stopping power and I don't. Now, yes, of course, this is a beta, and I fully expect connection issues, so I'm not going to bash on the game too hard. However, I am concerned about this because Infinity Ward's last title, Infinite Warfare, this was a big problem from what I remember, it was about the first month of the entire game. And they also had a beta for that game. So I am concerned that this will end up being a lasting issue even after launch for a period of time. And therefore, I just had to bring it up in this video. And it's definitely one of the big things that's really been holding back my enjoyment of this game as well. Something that makes this worse, and another piece of feedback I have, is there's no way to see what your connection is like. There's no connection meter. We don't even have those really simplistic connection bars. So you really have no idea if you're the problem or if you're lagging at that point or something is going on with the connection. And that's really frustrating to see. So at least by the launch of the game, there has to be some way to see your current ping to the server. This is extremely important information to have in an online first-person shooter. Moving on to the next thing that has really been impacting my enjoyment of the beta so far, and this really isn't a problem inherently wrong with the beta itself or the game itself. This is simply the level cap that we currently have being so low, and the fact that we have access to such a small amount of content currently, and much of that content is going to significantly impact the gameplay as well. I'm mainly looking at like perks, for instance. I would love to use the Ghost perk on a class aside from that default Ghost class, but you can't right now because the level cap is 10. Additionally, with a lot of the attachments, each gun has very few attachments that you're able to see in this build of the game, at least in its current state. And many of those attachments will have a noticeable impact on gameplay. The one that I would really like to see and do some testing on, but I haven't been able to, this is the rubber grip attachment, which as far as I'm aware is going to be the only way that you can reduce your sprint out time in Modern Warfare, and we simply don't have access to that on any of the guns. As a result, that's another one of my complaints right now, is the sprint out times are too slow considering the fact that there's no way of reducing them. Perhaps when we get to the full game, that rubber grip will solve all of my issues and it won't be a problem, but currently they're locking that content from us, and therefore we can't properly judge what it's actually going to be like in the full build of the game. Same thing goes with a lot of the stock attachments, especially the lightweight stock attachments that will allow us to strafe faster in gunfights. That's another really big element for aggressive players that we currently have no ability to judge because we simply don't have access to that content. Now, don't get me wrong, I do think it's good for them to keep some surprises for the full build of the game. I don't want them to release absolutely everything in the beta so that nothing is new when we get to the full build. But instead of locking and hiding attachments, which can significantly affect how a weapon performs, I feel like they should instead just restrict the number of weapons we have access to. I would much rather have a smaller pool of weapons with full access to attachments to test out and see how they work and see how they react in-game, rather than seeing a bunch of guns with almost no attachments available. Same thing goes with footstep audio. Even though I said that yes, I'm glad that you can actually hear footsteps in this build of the game, we don't have access to dead silence currently, which is actually a field upgrade rather than a perk, and I'm interested to see how that plays out, and I think that could improve the gameplay experience quite a bit for people that really like flanking, or moving around quite a bit, like myself. However, in this build of the game, you simply don't have access to it, and therefore we don't know what the game is going to play like when we will have access to that. So there is a very good chance that once that level cap increases, once we get access to more items in the game, my experience with the game will actually significantly improve, and I'm hoping that's the case. I'm really optimistic about this. I'm trying to stay positive here, but at this point, it's impossible to know, so I really hope they increase that level cap soon. Moving on to my next bit of feedback that I have, this one's starting to get a little bit more specific. This is the visibility of enemies when they're inside buildings. It can be extremely hard, and in some cases, impossible to spot enemies that are inside buildings unless their red name tag happens to appear. And while yes, this is more realistic and everything, when it comes to actual gameplay experience and gameplay balance, Call of Duty is an arcade shooter, not a hide-and-seek game, and having nearly invisible enemies is not a good thing for gameplay, in my opinion. I'm totally fine if you want to set up in a power position like a window, for instance. If that's how you want to play the game, that's actually a really viable tactic. That's a good way to play the game. But you already have several advantages being up in that window. You shouldn't also have the advantage of being practically invisible. So I hope they make an adjustment there so character models are a bit more visible when they're inside buildings, because right now there's just not enough contrast there and you just can't see them. Going off of that same point, head glitching is still pretty bad from what I've seen. I can't quite tell if it's improved from the alpha, and that right there is a problem. I've had several situations where an enemy kills me. All I could see on my screen was his forehead. I couldn't see a gun. I couldn't see his face. I could just see his forehead. And yet when I watched the kill cam, he had a full view of my body the entire time. This is a clear issue with the game. I don't know how anybody could disagree with that. This needs to be fixed. Next up, another issue that I have that thankfully Infinity Ward has acknowledged and will likely be changing, but I did want to point it out anyways. This is the fact that when you bring up the scoreboard, if you press square, which traditionally is the respawn now or skip kill cam button, it will start to try and load the profile of the person that you happen to be hovering over in that leaderboard. And the PlayStation menus can be horribly laggy at times. And if you guys were at my stream last night, you might remember this. I was actually stuck in this PlayStation menu for about 1.5 to 2 minutes. That is a very large portion of the game where I literally couldn't do anything. My PlayStation was basically bricked at that point, and there was no way of canceling it. There was nothing I could do about it. So a little quality of life issue, either change that button mapping so it's not square by default if you want to view the enemy profile, or make it so you have to hold the square button or something to view that player's profile rather than just tap it. I fully expect this will be fixed, no problem. Another thing to do with the scoreboard that again is relatively minor is just what they're displaying mid-game when you bring up that scoreboard. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever in its current state. I almost feel like this was completely unintentional, but for Team Deathmatch, when you bring up the scoreboard mid-game, all you can see are your kills and assists. And in Domination, all you can see are your kills and your deaths. That makes no sense to me whatsoever. Team Deathmatch should be showing kills, assists, and deaths. And with Domination, at the very least, it should show kills and objectives. Personally, I'd prefer if it also showed deaths, but I can understand the argument against that. People want other people to be encouraged to play the objective and not worry about their deaths, so I get that. But at the very least, it should show kills and number of captures and or defense. So again, that's something that's relatively minor, and I do anticipate that will be changing, but I had to bring it up in my initial feedback here. Next up, we're getting pretty close to the end of the list here. This is the spawns, and this is something where I always expect spawns to be a mess at launch. The simple reason for that is you can only do so much with in-house data. With just doing internal playtests, there's not enough data available. You would get so much more data out of 1 hour of an open beta than you would with months of in-house testing when it comes to spawns, and therefore I fully expect the spawns will be adjusted, will be improved over time, but it had to be said in this video, the spawns in the game's current state are rough. And with that, I think I'm going to stop it here when it comes to the things that I haven't been liking, or at least the specific things I haven't been liking so far in this beta. And I just wanted to say, generally speaking, the reason I haven't been enjoying this beta very much is I just feel there isn't enough variety in playstyles, or at least successful playstyles in this game currently. Like I said, a big part of that is just due to the fact that we don't have access to much of the stuff that's in the game, and therefore I am hoping this changes. But as of right now, I really feel the most consistently successful strategy is to get to a power position and look towards choke points coming out of enemy spawn points. For me, I'm having a hard time enjoying myself on either end of that. Even when I'm being successful and I'm doing well by pushing people back and killing them as they come out of their spawn points and just locking down a power position, I don't really find that to be an enjoyable playstyle. On the other end of that, when it happens to you and your teammates, especially when the enemy team is snowballing with a constant minimap whereas my team can't get a single UAV up, that's also not a very fun experience for me. So in all, at its core, in the game's current state, I just feel it doesn't allow for a wide variety of viable playstyles if you want to find success. If people want to play slow and camp, that's fine by me, but I feel that as of right now, aggressive players are being heavily alienated, and I don't feel that should be the case. I don't want this game to become super fast like Black Ops 4, for instance. I don't expect that by any means. I fully expect a slower Call of Duty game, but right now, in the game's current state, I'm just not seeing enough variety when it comes to viable playstyles. And with that, that's going to wrap it up for today's video. Of course, I'd like to know in the comment section below, what are your initial impressions based on the first day of the beta with Modern Warfare? Are you liking it so far? Not liking it too much? Anything you agree with, disagree with that was in this video? Just let me know those thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.
Yeah.